NIH's role in funding gain-of-function research at the lab? Is that the reason why?
So, Senator Hawley, I would say that in the event of any new and emerging infectious disease, if you've ever gone through a tabletop exercise in biosecurity,
Yeah. Answer my question. Is it because that NIH was actually helping to fund, EcoHealth was funding gain-of-function research in
No,
Wuhan?
I believe that's an inaccurate assessment.
In fact, your boss misled Congress and testified falsely that NIH and the EcoHealth had never conducted gain-of-function research in Wuhan, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
He did testify that.
I believe, sir, that what he testified to was that there was no evidence at that time that NIH was funding research.
Okay, did you just see that? Because I need a second before we watch the rest of this. What you just witnessed is a U.S. Senator doing something that has become genuinely rare in Washington, actually pressing someone for a straight answer, and not getting one, which tells you everything. I came into this not as a partisan. I came into this as someone who lived through the pandemic. Someone who watched people lose jobs, lose relationships, trying to make sense of what was happening and being told to shut up every time they asked a reasonable question. Senator Hawley is asking the questions millions of ordinary people have been asking for years. And the woman sitting across from him, who was literally the chief of staff at the NIH during all of this, is telling him censorship never happened. Censorship never happened. We're going to get into all of it. But first, if you're new here, hit subscribe because this is exactly the kind of content we cover. Real conversations, real accountability. Hit the like button if you think the American people deserved honest answers 4 years ago. And drop in the comments, did you get censored or know someone who did for asking about the lab leak? I want to hear it. All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Dr. Wollenitz, if I could start with you. You served as the chief of staff to Francis Collins for 4 years, is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
From 2017 to 2021, is that correct?
Yes, that's
correct.
So
right through the heart of the pandemic.
Yes.
I noticed that Dr. Collins was intensely interested in discrediting the lab leak. I guess we'll call it a hypothesis. I think it's probably a little bit stronger than that, now that we know something of what our intelligence agencies have long assessed. Last month, I had the chance to speak with Dr. Robert Gary, who sat right where you are, who co-authored that really, frankly, shameless propaganda piece, the Proximal Origin paper, which infamously stated that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. It went on to say it could not possibly have come from a lab. This, of course, we now know is not what multiple U.S. intelligence agencies assessed. What interests me is that your office was very involved in that paper, which was supposed to be an independent piece of scientific analysis, but Dr. Collins actually called Dr. Gary when he was supposedly working on the paper on February 1st, 2020. Is it normal for scientists who are supposedly doing independent research to get together and talk about how their conclusions are going to come out?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hawley. I think in general, yes, it is quite common for scientists across biomedical research fields, while they're in the process of doing research, to discuss with colleagues and other scientists. I do not believe that that is an accurate description of the conversations that took place.
Well, tell us, what were the nature of the conversations?
So, while I was not present for those conversations, my understanding based on readouts is there was a lot of interest in the origins and current understanding of SARS-CoV-2. And I think it's important when we're talking about the term lab leak theory to differentiate between the idea of a virus escaping from a lab, which is a biosafety violation, versus a virus that is engineered or manipulated in the lab and then escapes.
Yeah, and your boss and Dr. Fauci tried to discredit both of those things. They said that the lab was absolutely not involved. We know that at the time that this paper was supposedly being written, because we now have the private correspondence from Dr. Fauci, your boss said that it was a very destructive conspiracy to think that there was a lab involved. So he's on the phone with a scientist, quote-unquote scientist, who's supposedly writing an independent paper. By the way, Dr. Gary testified under oath that he was coming to his conclusions while this paper was being written. He was discovering the answers. But we now know that your boss was on the phone with him saying this is a very destructive conspiracy before the paper was even written. My question is, why was your office so intent on pushing to the public the idea that this could not possibly have been a lab issue? Is it because of the NIH's role in funding gain-of-function research at the lab? Is that the reason why?
So, Senator Hawley, I would say that in the event of any new and emerging infectious disease, if you've ever gone through a tabletop exercise in biosecurity,
Yeah. Answer my question. Is it because that NIH was actually helping to fund, EcoHealth was funding gain-of-function research?
No, I believe that's an inaccurate assessment.
In fact, your boss misled Congress and testified falsely that NIH and the EcoHealth had never conducted gain-of-function research at Wuhan, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
He did testify that.
I believe, sir, that what he testified to was that there was no evidence at that time that NIH was funding research that met the scope of the P3CO policy, which I want to differentiate from the term gain-of-function research,
of course,
which is a broader
this is the classic.
term.
This is the classic. Now that we've lied, now that you have, and your office lied to the American people for years, told the American people that a lab leak was a very destructive conspiracy. That's your boss's statement while you were his chief of staff. Of course, we now know that that was the conspiracy to hide this from the American people, to censor people who went out and said, you know what, actually, maybe this is a lab leak. Your office, Dr. Fauci and others, tried to actively censor them. There was a propaganda effort that this paper was the center of, and now everybody says, oh well, we just weren't sure at the time. We didn't really know. You knew exactly what you were doing. You were actively misleading the American people the entire time. Get this, after that paper, it's really an opinion piece, was published, your boss then says to Dr. Fauci that he'd really...
Let's watch the whole thing. After the full video. So now you've seen all of it. Let me tell you what stood out. Hawley came prepared. This was not grandstanding. The man had receipts. Dates, direct quotes, email contents. He cited February 1st, 2020. He cited April 2020. He quoted Collins's own words back at the witness. That is someone who did his homework. And what did he get in return? Deflection. Technicalities. The classic government move where they redefine the terms mid-conversation. It wasn't gain-of-function research. It didn't meet the P3CO policy definition. Right. Because if you change what words mean, suddenly nobody lied. Convenient. Now here is what really got me. Dr. Wan said, with a straight face, that she does not believe censorship took place. We are not talking about a difference of opinion. We are talking about scientists who had their careers threatened, journalists who were deplatformed, ordinary people kicked off Twitter and Facebook for asking a question that the FBI and multiple intelligence agencies eventually concluded was probably correct. Think about that timeline. The intelligence community was privately briefing Congress that a lab leak was the likely origin, while Fauci was standing at the White House podium saying the opposite. And the Proximal Origin paper, which was supposed to be independent science, was being written while Collins was on the phone coaching the conclusion. That is not science. That is narrative management. Some people will say Hawley was too aggressive, too loud. I get that. His style is not for everyone. But how many polite hearings have we watched where nobody got a real answer? Sometimes when the stakes are this high and someone keeps dodging, you push. And he pushed. The real tragedy here is the damage done to public trust in science. And that damage was not caused by the people asking questions. It was caused by the people who should have been answering them. When institutions use the authority of science to shut down legitimate inquiry, they do not protect science. They destroy it. And Dr. Wan sitting there with zero regret is honestly the most damning moment in the whole clip. Because regret would mean accountability. And accountability is clearly not on the table. Hawley said it best. You thought the public would always be kept in the dark. The emails came out. The private messages came out. The intelligence assessments came out. The truth got through. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers, honestly. But also with this. The era of blindly trusting institutions just because they wear a lab coat or hold a government title, that era is over. And maybe that is not the worst thing. If this made you think or made you angry, share it. Keep this conversation going. See you in the next one.